Freeze for a moment. Do not scroll. Do not look away. Because the silence that entered your life was not accidental, and the distance you felt was not rejection. There is a reason your life became quieter while others grew louder, a reason people disappeared without explanation, and a reason certain doors slammed shut just as you were about to walk through them. What felt like loss was actually filtration. What felt like abandonment was alignment. They didn't leave because you were weak. They left because they sensed what walks beside you, something they could not name but could feel in their spirit, a weight, a presence, an authority forming quietly in you. There is something around your life that agitates the insecure, unsettles the manipulative, and exposes what is unclean. You are not imagining it. You are not cursed. You are protected. The sudden coldness, the awkward distance, and the unexplained retreat from people who once had easy access to you was not coincidence. It was recognition. They saw something they were never meant to see, and instinct told them to step back. Before we go further, do this now. Like this video and subscribe, because messages like this do not come twice, and this one found you on purpose. Now take a breath, because what you're about to understand will reframe the loneliness that followed obedience and the isolation that followed awakening. You didn't lose people. You were separated. You didn't become invisible. You were hidden. And you were not abandoned. You were placed under divine restriction. There is a season where God does not elevate you publicly, but instead withdraws access to you privately. And this is the phase no one prepares you for. Support fades without drama. Conversations feel shallow. Invitations stop coming. Even family can feel emotionally distant, not because love is gone, but because alignment has shifted. And while the outside grows quieter, something on the inside becomes louder, clearer, and sharper. Your spirit strengthens without applause. Your intuition refines without validation. Your discernment deepens without permission. This is not depression. It is preparation. This is not punishment. It is positioning. In silence, your character is forged. In isolation, your voice is purified. In stillness, authority takes shape without ego. The reason it feels intense is because something powerful cannot be built in noise. Those who walked away sensed that if they stayed, they would either have to change or be exposed. And many people choose distance over transformation. That is why the insecure grow uncomfortable around you, why manipulators lose leverage, and why certain energies cannot remain near you for long. They are not confused. They are threatened by what you are becoming. The quiet season is not the end of your story. It is the foundation of it. What is forming in you now does not need witnesses, only obedience. And when access returns, it will be intentional, selective, and aligned. This was never about losing connection. It was about protecting what is being built in you, because what comes next carries weight, and not everyone is meant to stand near it. Now, let's dive deeper. Point 1. Why loneliness appears when protection activates. Loneliness feels like abandonment only when you don't yet understand its assignment. You were taught, conditioned really, that safety comes from numbers, that connection equals protection, and that solitude is something to fear. But spiritual mechanics operate on a different logic. When protection activates, it doesn't always arrive as comfort. It often arrives as subtraction. As your awareness expands, your discernment sharpens, and your inner world becomes more ordered. Your external environment can no longer remain cluttered. Something has to give. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of interference. When God activates protection, He doesn't always build walls around you. Sometimes He removes traffic. He quiets the room. He clears the noise so you can finally hear your own thoughts without distortion. That's when you begin to notice subtle but undeniable shifts. Conversations that once felt engaging now feel hollow. Small talk drains you. Drama repels you on a visceral level. You don't feel superior, you feel misaligned. This isn't arrogance, it's calibration. Your nervous system is no longer tuned to chaos, and because of that, people who fed on emotional volatility can no longer access you. They can't provoke reactions. They can't harvest attention. They can't pull you into cycles of confusion or validation seeking. And this creates discomfort for them, not because you confronted them, but because you stopped vibrating at their frequency. So they leave, or they distance themselves, or they fade out quietly, without explanation. And you're left alone with questions, replaying interactions, wondering what you did wrong, wondering why things suddenly feel so empty. But the truth is, you didn't lose connection. You outgrew dependency. You stabilized internally, and instability can no longer coexist with that state. Protection doesn't always feel warm. Sometimes it feels quiet. Sometimes it feels like a vacuum. But that emptiness isn't punishment. It's preparation. It's the space required for authority to form, for clarity to settle, for your identity to solidify without external influence. Loneliness, in this phase, is not a sign of rejection. It's evidence that your system has been secured. Point 2. They sensed the shift before you could name it. Long before you had the language to explain what was happening inside you, other people felt it on a nervous system level. Humans are intuitive creatures, even when they pretend to be purely logical. We track micro changes constantly. Tone that tightens, posture that becomes grounded, pauses that grow longer, boundaries that no longer ask for permission. When your inner world began to reorganize itself, when you stopped filling silence with explanations, when you stopped oversharing to feel safe, when your reactions slowed and your emotions stopped spilling outward, a quiet signal was released into the environment. That signal said something simple and unsettling. Access is changing. You didn't announce it. You didn't make a speech. You didn't post cryptic messages or confront anyone directly. You simply stopped leaking energy. And for people who were accustomed to having emotional entry points into you, people who felt relevant, powerful, or secure through your availability, that change registered as a threat. They may not consciously understand what happened. On the surface, they will blame timing, distance, stress, busyness, or the vague idea of growing apart. But beneath those explanations, something more primal occurred. They felt a door close without hearing it slam. You became harder to read. Your emotional responses were no longer predictable. Your presence no longer bent to accommodate their expectations. And unreadable people destabilize systems that rely on control, extraction, or subtle manipulation. This is why some people grow cold toward you without a clear incident. This is why warmth can disappear without an argument, without betrayal, without any dramatic event to point to. It isn't rejection in the way it appears. It's self-preservation on their part. Because when someone can no longer anticipate your reactions, influence your decisions, or pull energy from you on demand, they lose leverage. And losing leverage feels like danger to those who built their sense of stability around access to you. So they retreat, detach, or quietly reposition themselves, not because you did something wrong, but because you did something irreversible. You changed internally. You stopped being easy to map. You stopped being emotionally transparent. You became still, contained, and selective. And once that happens, the people who were only comfortable with the old version of you can feel it instantly, often before you fully realize it yourself. Point 3. What walks beside you does not negotiate. There is a presence that forms around a person who has endured enough, reflected enough, and integrated enough lessons that they no longer need to prove who they are. And this presence is not loud, dramatic, or aggressive. It is quiet, heavy, and unmistakable, the kind of energy that enters a room before words do and remains after the conversation ends. This presence does not argue because it no longer seeks validation. It does not chase because it understands alignment cannot be forced. It does not explain because truth no longer needs translation when it is embodied. It simply stands, rooted, centered, and unmoved. And that presence cannot be manipulated. Guilt does not move it because it no longer confuses responsibility with self-betrayal. Urgency does not rush it because it has learned that pressure is often a disguise for control. Fear doesn't control it because fear has already been faced, dismantled, and understood. This is why the tactics that once worked on you suddenly stopped working. The emotional leverage, the silent expectations, the subtle threats of withdrawal or disappointment, they all lost their power. Not because you hardened, but because you stabilized. You didn't become cold. You became grounded. And grounding feels like rejection to people who survive by keeping others emotionally unstable. To them, your calm feels like distance. Your boundaries feel like punishment. Your clarity feels like defiance. This is also why forced connections begin to unravel during this phase. Relationships that required you to perform, to rescue, to fix, to explain yourself endlessly, or to carry emotional weight that was never yours in the first place, cannot coexist with this new internal structure. They don't end because you failed them. They end because they were built on imbalance. And imbalance cannot survive in the presence of alignment. These connections collapse under their own weight, exposing the hidden contracts you never agreed to, but were expected to uphold. You didn't sabotage anything. You didn't withdraw love. You didn't change the rules. Protection stepped in. When a higher order enters your life, lower patterns don't get destroyed by force. They simply become uncomfortable, unsustainable, and impossible to maintain. What walks beside you now does not negotiate your worth, your pace, or your boundaries. It holds the line quietly, and everything misaligned eventually removes itself. Point 4. Isolation is where authority is installed, not where value is lost. Most people fear being alone because they confuse solitude with disappearance. They assume that if no one is watching, nothing important is happening. But invisibility is not erasure. It is incubation. When something is being built to last, it is often removed from noise, not because it lacks worth, but because it has not yet taken its final form. This phase is not about being forgotten. It is about being refined. It is the season where you stop outsourcing your identity to reactions, applause, or resistance, where you are no longer asking the world who you are, but listening closely enough to remember it yourself. In isolation, your self-trust begins to return, not as a burst of confidence, but as a quiet, unshakable knowing. Your intuition sharpens because it is no longer drowned out by opinions, comparisons, and constant emotional interference. You start to notice how much of your past energy was spent performing, explaining, defending, or shrinking just enough to be acceptable. And when those demands disappear, that energy comes back home. Your thoughts slow down. Your nervous system settles. You become less reactive because you are no longer living on the edge of other people's expectations. This is where authority is formed. Not the authority that needs to dominate or announce itself, but the kind that is felt the moment you enter a room. Authority is not loud. Authority is grounded. It does not rush. It does not beg. It does not need consensus to exist. Settled people do not chase crowds to confirm their worth, because their stability is internal, not borrowed. That is why this phase feels heavy. You are carrying more of yourself than you ever have before. You are no longer leaking energy outward. You are becoming self-contained. And that weight is unfamiliar at first. Not everyone can stand close to someone who no longer needs validation to breathe, because independence of spirit quietly exposes dependency in others. So isolation is not punishment. It is installation. It is the moment where you stop being shaped by reaction and start being governed by inner command. Point 5. Clarity terrifies those who relied on confusion. There is a subtle but powerful shift that happens when you stop living inside emotional fog and begin to see with precision. People who have survived, manipulated, or protected themselves through confusion feel deeply unsettled by someone who no longer needs noise to function. Clarity removes the chaos they once hid behind. You no longer argue to be understood, because understanding no longer requires permission. You no longer chase closure, because clarity has already closed the door internally. You no longer demand explanations, because explanations are often performances designed to delay truth. Instead, you observe, you notice patterns instead of promises, consistency instead of charisma, and behavior instead of words. And the moment you begin to observe rather than react, a quiet transfer of power occurs. Those who depended on your emotional engagement lose leverage. Emotional reactions are currency to those who thrive on confusion, and when you stop paying, the system collapses. This is why silence unsettles certain people more than confrontation ever could. Confrontation still invites performance. Silence removes the stage entirely. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer reactive. You're no longer emotionally available on demand. You don't rush to clarify, defend, or explain yourself because your internal alignment no longer needs external validation. That absence of reaction forces others to sit with themselves, and that is where the discomfort begins. When you are clear, you reflect people back to themselves without saying a word. Some experience this as pressure. Others experience it as exposure. Not everyone wants to be seen clearly, especially those who benefited from being misunderstood. So they retreat, not always with anger, not always with noise, but with distance, avoidance, or sudden disinterest. This withdrawal is not proof that you did something wrong. It is proof that your clarity disrupted a dynamic that relied on your confusion. You didn't become dangerous. You became transparent. And transparency reveals intention, motive, and imbalance. For those who were never operating with clean intentions, clarity feels like a threat. They would rather leave the room than stand in front of a mirror they didn't choose. Point 6. Protection always precedes expansion. This is not philosophy meant to comfort you. It is a law that repeats itself across psychology, history, and spiritual development. Before growth, there is withdrawal. Before visibility, there is obscurity. Before influence, there is solitude. Every system that survives long-term follows this sequence, and every individual who bypasses it pays a price later. You are not behind. You are not delayed. You are in sequence, moving through the exact phase required to support what is coming next. Expansion without protection does not create success. It creates burnout, corruption, and collapse. This is why so many people rise quickly and fall violently. They were amplified before they were stabilized. That is not happening to you. That is why this season feels slow, narrow, and quiet. Speed without stability destroys people from the inside out. The silence is not punishment, it is calibration. The quiet is aligning your nervous system, your values, and your identity so that future pressure does not fracture you. The lack of external affirmation is not rejection. It is strengthening your internal compass, so you're no longer dependent on applause to know who you are. Right now, you're learning how to stand without witnesses, how to move without validation, how to remain grounded without feedback. That skill is rare, and it cannot be rushed. When expansion comes, and it will not overwhelm you, distort you, or hollow you out, because you learned how to stand alone first. You learned restraint before reach, depth before width, stability before scale. And that is why what is coming will last, not spike and disappear. Point 7. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to carry something through. Some people are born to belong, others are born to pass through systems and alter them. If you've always felt slightly out of place, slightly misunderstood, slightly ahead, or slightly detached, it's because your nervous system wasn't designed for sameness. You are not here to be absorbed by the environment. You are here to influence it. And influence requires separation. What walks beside you now is not there to isolate you forever. It is there to protect you until you are strong enough, clear enough, and grounded enough to move without being drained. If this message resonated, it's because you are already in the protection phase, and protection often feels lonely before it feels powerful. Remember that. Stay grounded, stay observant, and know this: you were never abandoned, you were guarded.